Gayle Saunders here with Brennan Sokowoski, new writer with Fourth and John. We're talking the prospect. Obviously, the draft is getting closer. You know, people are getting tested on the timeline. Everyone's trying to find that correct wide receiver for the Philadelphia Eagles. And a player that we're going to talk about today, Tee Higgins out of Clemson. Just saying the name Tee Higgins might trigger some folks on the timeline. I don't know if it's that he reminds some people of Alshon Jeffrey. If he's people think he's the same receiver as Alshon J. Jaw, or that he doesn't have wouldn't have a role in the offense. But at the end of the day, he's been a highly productive player for Clemson over the last couple of years. We're talking about a guy who is, he was Mr. Wide Receiver. Like he was, what top one of the top wide receivers coming out of high school. Donovan People-Jones was number one. He was number two, and Jerry Jeudy was number three. This guy's been, over the years, he's developed into his own player. Obviously, a very productive player. But your initial feelings on T. Higgins, Brendan? I know you've been standing for his game, so this is why you're here, and this is why I wanted to talk to you about T. Higgins.
Yeah. So initially, whenever I watched T. Higgins at Clemson, I looked at him. I was like, "Oh, this is Alshon Jeffrey. I'm just going to pass over this." But then, as you get into the weeds of the wide receiver class, you got the second tier. Everybody thought Henry Ruggs was going to fall to us, and that he ran that 4.27, and that was pretty much the end of that. So I dug more into T. Higgins, and as I watch his game, you see things that. Um, we wanted Alshon to be, essentially. We wanted him to be that, develop a relationship with Carson and build on the Super Bowl winning year. And, obviously injuries and attitudes derailed that. But whenever you see T. Higgins, you see a better version of Alshon. Um, even down to his route running, his releases may not be great, but he has quick feet, deceptive speed. Don't get too caught up in his 40 time and everything else like that because the guy's as reliable as they come.
Right away, like you know, as Eagle fans, people will try to like pick apart a player's game, and one of the things that the guy has been a reliable playmaker. He's
Right.
been, they say the best ability is availability. And he's been that for Clemson. Um,
Exactly. Played 30 games over the last 2 years, been a championship caliber player in the last 2 seasons and was competing in his freshman season. So,
and he's the only player in school history to record double-digit touchdowns, 25 touchdowns in the last 2 years.
right. So you're
Um,
talking about 13 this past season and then 12 in his sophomore year. So
yeah,
the big jump from his freshman to his sophomore season and then continued to carry that into his junior year.
yeah, and he's been a consistent playmaker, and you can see how his game is developed. Yeah, he's tied with DeAndre Hopkins and Sammy Watkins with touchdowns. So I think when you look at T. Higgins' game, you're looking at a guy that um, you're trying to forecast how he fits with Carson Wentz, and he's
Right.
a guy that you could see him developing a back shoulder fade relationship with. Obviously, we'd like to see that from Alshon. We've seen it in
Right.
times, but not consistently. I think
Exactly.
to have a consistent back shoulder fade relationship, it's more than just ability from the quarterback and the wide receiver. I think it's also chemistry. Like
Exactly.
you want to go hang out with this guy, you want to stay after practice with, and
You want to
develop.
go to North Dakota with him in the off season?
There you go. Or I think it's. We're not going to say there's drama there,
No.
um,
Hey.
but I'm saying that's the kind of relationship you could probably build with this guy. Trevor Lawrence. There's plays where he throws the ball up, and they're not accurate passes on
No,
these on some of these plays.
not in the slightest.
And T. Higgins is really mossing some of these guys, and really boxing some of these players out. So the catch radius is a big plus with T. Higgins.
Outstanding. Huge receiver. He could stand to gain probably 10 pounds of muscle just so he could compete with some of the pro, top level
Right.
defensive backs. But I mean, you're talking about a guy that's 6'4", 205. You know, it, long wingspan, huge strides because of how long his legs are. Like you're talking about a very lengthy receiver, and it showed in his catch rate. You're talking about a guy who had caught 74% of all passes thrown his way, not just on target passes.
The other thing about his game, which you can see that it kind of shows up in his game, is him being a basketball player.
Right,
The dude had offers, scholarships to play basketball. He said that his father was a huge football player, and he just wanted to make his dad proud. He loved football too, and he just decided that football was his sport. And being 6'4" in basketball is not being like 6'4" playing football, is what he said.
right,
So Tee Higgins, a guy who, I think you see some of these prospects that come from like troubled backgrounds, that they've gone through adversity. Uh, he's a guy. His mom dealt with a drug addiction for like 16, like 12 or 16 years. So he dealt with a lot of hardship, seeing his mom go through that. I think his mom got shot like twice. Did some time, and he said that he never wanted, he wouldn't wish that on anyone. In the way that he grew up was pretty tough, but he always persevered. But he drew strength from his mom, seeing her come out of her addiction, and get back on the mend, and that's been an inspiring thing for him in his career.
right. So I mean, you're talking about a guy who went through adversity, but adversity builds character, and obviously in T. Higgins' circumstance, it's built positive character.
Yeah,
So, you're talking about I'm not going to say one way or the other, but you're talking about potentially a good locker room guy who could buy in, unlike certain receivers.
yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, like, somebody, like, everyone will talk about these prospects in terms of numbers and 40 times, and how many touchdowns have you scored, but it's also about character,
Right.
and how does this player fit into your locker room. Overall, I think it's just weird to see how many people have like piled on the T Higgins hate as of late. Obviously, it's kind of are you standing for T Higgins at number 21 if he's there?
Absolutely. 1000%.
1,000%.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And that's what I think a lot of people just see the Alshon comparison and they're like, all right, that's it for me. We already have Alshon. Alshon's on a guaranteed contract this year. We're not trading him. We're not cutting him. All this dead cap, blah, blah, blah. Whole different other side of the story. But I think bringing in a guy like Higgins, who's going to be on a rookie deal, so you got the 5th year option as well. I think bringing him in to learn off of a guy, as far as we'll talk later about his issues beating press, but bringing him in while a guy like Alshon is still there to help him learn to beat press and be deceptive in his releases, it could have lasting effects for the Eagles, not just in 2020.
But obviously, you know, with every prospect, no one's perfect. You have to talk about some of the parts that of their game where might be seen as weaknesses.
Right.
Any, what are your main weaknesses coming from your point of view on his game?
I think obviously the big one is going to be that he has very average speed. He's not explosive at the line of scrimmage and has a hard time beating press. That's the one thing that the Eagles lacked in 2019 was, a guy who can get off the line and get open deep. So I can see the whole narrative of not needing another rebounder. But that's not to say that he doesn't get open with clean routes and quick feet either. Um, but yeah, I think the biggest issue with him is going to be the lack of explosive, game-changing speed like you see out of, like, obviously Deshaun when he's healthy, but Henry Ruggs in this draft.
Yeah, I think where he could you know improve on is as a blocker.
Yeah.
He's not like if you look at like a Denzel Mims, you look at some of his blocking and the effort that he puts in. There's almost a highlight tape on Mims as a blocker.
Right.
But like I think in terms of he could be a better blocker. I think his releases. You know, some of the I believe that stuff will work at the college level, but I think when you get a seasoned cornerback to break down his game, it could be an issue.
Yeah,
Um, but I think he can. He can. I think he can improve on that. I don't think it's like
absolutely.
a super weakness. I'm just one of the things that you start to point out.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
think
you're talking about a 21-year-old receiver.
yeah, I think his play strength. Like he's got room to grow on his body, and that's the other thing. Once he gets an NFL body, his game can elevate.
Right. And
If
we
he
spoke about this the other night. He measured in at 205. So, uh, training for the combine is a little bit different than training for the NFL season. Whenever you're training for the NFL season coming out of college, you want to put that bulk on. Whereas in the combine, everybody's so focused on your broad jump and your vertical jump and your 40 time and like the whole explosion factor of the combine that it, it can weigh on you.
yeah, and he ran a 4.58 at his pro day, uh, 2.72, 20 yard, um, 10 yard, 1.66, vertical jump 31, broad jump 10.3. But I think the one thing that a lot of people don't really talk about, he said that he injured his hamstring 3 weeks before the combine, so he didn't really want to like test it. And he was recovering from that.
Right.
He did some of that stuff at his pro day, um, but I think overall, like the weaknesses, some of the he didn't play that. We played like 49% of snaps. Uh,
That's over his three or over his 2018
yeah.
season. After 2019, it jumped to just over 51% of snaps.
So you're looking at the kind of production that we talked about
Right.
earlier in the video.
Right.
Now, just imagine he played all 4 quarters.
Right. So you're talking about a guy who almost put up 1,200 yards and 13 touchdowns playing barely over 50% of your snaps.
It does help that it's almost funny, like some people look at that as a negative that he played with Trevor Lawrence. I mean, you can't help that he played
Exactly.
with a solid quarterback, but I mean,
But
he did he did what he had to do.
a, you're also talking about an offense that had a running back rush for 1,600 yards.
Yeah,
You know, ETN Jr. obviously is going to be an amazing NFL talent, but um, that's not for this video. But he led the team in all-purpose yards. But Higgins was only 600 yards behind him, and he's a receiver, not a running back. You're talking about a dual threat with ETN, who's running and catching the ball, whereas T. Higgins is just a receiver. He actually did have one uh, rushing attempt for 36 yards on a jet sweep, but overall, you're talking about volume is going more towards ETN's side,
yeah,
and still managed to finish second in all-purpose yards on the team.
yeah. I mean, the other like the thing I remember. I forget who was on the timeline. Was just talking about that run he had. And they were just like, "Oh man, he just seems slow." Obviously he scored a touchdown, made a nice couple moves, but they're like, "Oh, he's slow." I mean, he's it's he's a lanky, long dude. So like
Yeah,
sometimes I feel like his speed sneaks up on a couple defensive backs. Obviously, if you got him working the middle of the field on like safeties and linebackers, it's a mismatch, or smaller cornerbacks,
yeah,
it's a mismatch. Um, so the one other stat I wanted to point out, he scored a touchdown on 20% of his catches, and 81% of his catches went for first downs. So when talking about his game overall, you're talking about a guy who's a chain leader. But
right.
I'll let his own words. This is from T. Higgins' mouth himself. I am a tall receiver, and I'm going to win a 50-50 ball, uh, 80-20 my way, he said. I use my basketball background to help me with those balls, boxing out, but I'm obviously behind a defender. I just use my jumping ability for like a rebound. That's a feeling like no other. Taking a ball from a guy that's defending you it's like a one, I beat you that play. And that kind of
Right.
like, when usually we talk about like plays, if you can think about your favorite, plays that you can see from a prospect that, and I really didn't have a favorite. There was a couple plays that, um, just he's mossing guys, but it's just I appreciate the way that he wins on the football field because not all wide receivers can do
And
what he
how he
does.
wins is so Philly. It's grit, toughness. I'm gonna beat you out of it 100% of the time.
Exactly. When you look at our receiver core, there's only a couple guys who can do that. Like in theory, J. Jaw, Alshon, but there's not other guys that can actually win with the way that Tee Higgins does. The wingspan that he has is impressive. But like if we're going to a bunch of plays that really stand out to me, but there's not really. They're all kind of just like, I'm watching them just like, man, he's dominating
Yeah.
down by the goal line. He's mossing guys. He's creating separation in his own way, whether it be through the air or boxing players out. I think he can develop as a receiver, develop as a route runner, develop getting off the press and stuff like that. People want to see him be more productive against bigger names. I think he could help himself there. But overall, as a player, I think he's a solid player, and I think in a deep wide receiver class, I feel like he holds his own. Now, do I feel like he's the guy at number 21? I'm not sure yet. Like I'm really, really, but I'm not gonna say I would feel anger. Like if the Eagles personally feel like he adds an element to their offense, I'm gonna take their word for it.
Right.
But I'm not gonna sit here and down his game just because he reminds me of, or I see him for who he is a player, and I see where he could potentially be, a star in this league.
I
Like
mean,
if you're gonna,
you're talking. Everybody wants to say that he didn't run a good 40 time, and I know that we're prying for a good speed receiver, but you know, I'll I'll buy into Djax this season, saying that 2020 is going to be his season, and go in on T Higgins, where he has an NFL comparison of like an AJ Green, DeAndre Hopkins type of player, or Devontae Adams type of player, where they're not blazing speed but they run good
yeah,
routes. I'll take that 100% of the time.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's 40 is overplayed. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins ran a 4.57. T
Right.
Higgins ran a 4.58. It is what it
Adams
is. It's all about
4.56.
the way that you separate and the way that you can get off the releases and how you get off and tell stories with your routes. And I think
Right.
I think he has an opportunity wherever he goes. I mean, if he goes in the right situation, he can be successful.
Right.
Um, any favorite plays from you?
I don't have any specific favorite plays of his, but I mean, if you watch his highlight tape, like you're gonna see him moss some receivers extremely harsh, and it is so enjoyable for me to watch just because it's a gritty, tough receiver that you're getting. Like maybe he doesn't always like go 100% on his run blocks or anything, but whenever it comes to his routes and he's the main guy that needs to get open, he gets open and he catches the ball however he can find a way.
It's just interesting to look at this wide receiver class and know that there's so many different flavors of
Right.
wide receivers. And like, we talked about Jalen Rager in our last video, completely different type of wide receiver
Completely different.
and completely different type of role. When we talked about Jalen Rager, we're talking a guy who can, do bubble screens and like game breaking vertical routes and like
Right.
give you you know, some special teams play on punt. Like, okay, now we're looking at T. Higgins. He's a guy who wins through the air down by the goal line, mossing players, reliable target, um,
But don't
intermediate
forget,
game.
the man wins at the sticks.
Like we're talking about, like each player has their own different flavor, so you have to respect it.
It's so
Respect the game.
crazy. that you know, you can get guys like Antonio Gandy Golden, like probably like in the fifth round. And if that's the kind of receiver you want, you could get him in the fifth. Whereas other drafts, you might have to spend a late second, early third on a guy like that.
Yeah. I mean, any last words on your part about T Higgins?
I think that his lack of production against top tier talent needs to be reevaluated because also another name that Eagles fans are familiar with is AJ Terrell, the corner from Clemson, and Kayvon Wallace, the safety from Clemson, and Isaiah Simmons, the linebacker safety hybrid from Clemson. He's going against these guys on a day-to-day basis, so he's out there with the best day in and day out. On top of that, you're talking about a guy who only played 51% of snaps this year. Maybe he didn't get the production because he's not getting the opportunities. But at the end of the day, 3.9 yards per route run, I'm buying into it, especially with the high first down conversion rate and the high touchdown conversion rate.
Well, Brennan, let everyone know where they can find you on social media.
I'm on Twitter at B Sokowoski. Obviously, you can find me on the Fourth and John site. Feel free to shoot me a follow on Twitter or Instagram, same handle as well. I'm down to talk pretty much anything, all things football. So,
And I know Brennan recently has an article out about the 2020 class, breaking down some of the wide receivers entitled The Others. But I am Gayle Saunders. You can find me at Eagle Sessions on Twitter. We're really gearing up for this NFL draft, and it's right down the road. But that's all for me and Brennan talking the prospect. Fourth and John, fly Eagles, fly.
go Birds.